I never expected my life to change the day I drove past that old junkyard on Route 66 in Amarillo, Texas. But when I saw the weathered, "Everything must go" sign hanging crooked on the chain-link fence, something made me pull over. My name is Xander, and I had just turned 42 that spring. I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown, spent my weekends mowing the lawn and trying to stay out of trouble with the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. My wife had left me 3 years prior, taking half of everything except my stubbornness and my love for old things that most people considered garbage. The divorce had been amicable enough, but it left me with a house that felt too big and too quiet, and a checking account that was healthier than my social life. The junkyard belonged to a man named Earl Thompson, according to the faded sign near the office trailer. He was 86 years old, with hands that shook when he poured coffee into styrofoam cups, and eyes that still sparkled when he talked about the old days. His grandson was moving him into a nursing home in Oklahoma City, and everything on the property had to go within 60 days. "Most folks come here looking for parts," Earl said, gesturing at the acres of rusted metal and overgrown weeds. "But I am selling the whole thing. 6 acres, everything on it, $45,000. That includes the trailer, all the vehicles, all the scrap, everything." I should have said no. I should have finished my coffee, shaken his hand, and driven back to my quiet house in Sunset Ridge. Instead, I found myself thinking about the extra bedroom I never used, the savings account gathering dust, and the monotony of my life. Before I could talk myself out of it, I heard myself say, "I will take it." Earl looked at me like I had just sprouted wings. "Son, you understand what you are buying. This is not some cleaned-up lot. There are probably 200 old cars out here, most of them stripped for parts decades ago. Lot of junk." "I understand," I said, though I absolutely did not understand what I was getting myself into. We shook hands, and 2 weeks later, after the paperwork cleared and my savings account took a significant hit, I owned 6 acres of what most people would call an eyesore. I spent my first Saturday as a junkyard owner walking the property, cataloging what I had bought. Most of it was exactly what Earl had described: rusted hulks, stripped frames, piles of parts that might have been valuable in 1975. But there was something peaceful about the place, something honest about the decay and the history. That peace lasted exactly 9 days. I was at the junkyard on a Sunday afternoon, pulling weeds away from an old Ford pickup, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Is this Xander?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. She sounded like someone who had been practicing how to pronounce disappointment. Speaking. "This is Patricia Wellington, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. I am calling about a matter of significant concern to the community." My stomach dropped. The HOA and I had a complicated relationship, which is to say, they left me alone as long as I kept my grass trimmed and did not paint my house any unapproved colors. Patricia Wellington had been president for 6 years, and in that time, she had fined 17 families for various infractions, from holiday decorations that stayed up too long to mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black. "What can I help you with, Patricia?" "It has come to my attention that you have purchased some kind of junkyard property. Several concerned neighbors saw you loading what appeared to be automotive parts into your truck last weekend. I had brought home exactly 1 box of old tools, thinking they might be useful." "I bought some property, yes. It is an investment. An investment." She repeated the word like I had suggested investing in nuclear waste. "Mr. Xander, need I remind you that Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant explicitly prohibits running a business from residential property. And Section 18 covers environmental hazards and eyesores. I am not running a business from my house, I said, keeping my voice level. The property is on Route 66, outside city limits. But you live in Sunset Ridge, and your association with such an establishment reflects poorly on our community. I will be calling an emergency board meeting to discuss this matter. Expect a formal letter. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the Texas sun, surrounded by rusted metal and broken dreams, and wondered what I had gotten myself into. The formal letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by certified mail. It was 2 pages of single-spaced text, citing various HOA regulations and expressing grave concerns about my recent business venture. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock in the community center. My attendance was strongly encouraged. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday at work, distracted and irritable. My colleague Jerry noticed me staring at the wall during lunch. "You all right, man? You look like someone killed your dog." "The HOA is on my case about the junkyard," I said. Jerry whistled low. "Patricia Wellington's HOA. That woman once fined the Hendersons $200 because their Christmas wreath was still up on January 3rd. You are in for a fight." Thursday evening came too quickly. The Sunset Ridge Community Center was a bland beige building with motivational posters about community spirit and neatly trimmed hedges. Inside, about 30 people sat in folding chairs, most of them looking curious or concerned or both. Patricia Wellington stood at the front behind a folding table, flanked by 4 other board members. Patricia was exactly what you would expect from an HOA president, who had made enforcement her personal mission. She was 53, with short blonde hair styled in what I called the "I want to speak to the manager" cut, and she wore a navy blazer that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. "Let us call this meeting to order," she said, tapping a gavel that seemed excessive for a homeowners association. "We have several items on the agenda, but first, we need to address the situation with Mr. Xander." Every head turned toward me. I felt like I was on trial. "Mr. Xander has recently purchased a junkyard," Patricia continued, saying the word junkyard like it was a communicable disease. "While the property is not technically within Sunset Ridge boundaries, his association with such an establishment raises concerns about property values and community standards." A man I recognized from 3 houses down raised his hand. "Is he planning to bring junk into the neighborhood?" "I brought home 1 box of tools," I said, standing up. My voice came out stronger than I felt. "I bought an investment property. What I do outside this neighborhood, as long as it complies with HOA rules here, is my business." "Is it, though?" Patricia's smile sharpened. Section 21 of our covenant includes a morality clause. Residents are expected to maintain standards that reflect positively on Sunset Ridge. Operating a junkyard hardly qualifies. I am not operating anything yet. I am assessing the property. "Semantics," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively. "The board has discussed this matter, and we are proposing a new amendment to the covenant. Any resident engaged in business activities that could be deemed detrimental to community image will be subject to review and potential fines. We will be voting on this amendment at next month's meeting." "You cannot just create rules to target one person," I said. "That is not how this works." "We can and we will," Patricia replied. "This meeting is adjourned." I drove home fuming. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Susan who always waved when I mowed the lawn, was getting her mail when I pulled into my driveway. "I heard about the meeting," she said quietly. "Patricia is out of line. Some of us know it." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. That weekend, I went back to the junkyard with a renewed sense of purpose. If Patricia Wellington wanted to make my life difficult over this property, I was going to make damn sure it was worth the fight. I started in the back corner, where Earl had mentioned some older vehicles were stored under tarps that had long since rotted away. Most of what I found was exactly what I expected: rust, decay, stripped frames. But 3 vehicles in the far back corner, partially hidden by overgrown mesquite trees, caught my attention. They were in better shape than the others, covered by a makeshift shelter that had partially collapsed, but had provided some protection from the elements. The first was a 1969 Dodge Charger, painted a faded orange that might have been bright once. The body had rust, but the frame looked solid. The interior was trashed, but the dashboard was intact. I popped the hood with some effort and found a 440 cubic inch V8 engine, seized up but possibly restorable. The second car made my heart skip. It was a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, the same model Steve McQueen drove in Bullitt. This one was dark green, or had been before decades of sun exposure. The roof had a dent and all the tires were flat, but when I looked inside I saw the original gauges, the original steering wheel. The engine was missing, but the car was largely complete. The third vehicle was tucked behind the other 2 and I almost missed it. A 1970 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda, painted a distinctive lime green that was still visible under the grime. The hood scoop was dented, and the rear window was cracked, but the body was remarkably straight. When I managed to open the hood, I found the Hemi engine still in place, though covered in decades of dust and oil. I stood there for a long moment, trying to process what I was looking at. I was not a car expert, but I had watched enough automotive shows to know these were not ordinary vehicles. These were muscle cars from the golden era, the kind that collectors paid serious money for. That Sunday night, I started researching. What I found made me sit back in my chair and read the numbers 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. A 1969 Dodge Charger 440, even in rough condition, could bring $40,000 to $60,000 with the right buyer. A restored one could hit 6 figures. A 1967 Mustang Fastback, especially if it had the right engine configuration originally, was worth $70,000 to $90,000 in project condition. Restored, they sold for $200,000 or more. And the Plymouth Hemi-Cuda, that was the crown jewel. Hemi-Cudas were among the rarest and most valuable muscle cars ever made. Even in rough, unrestored condition, they sold for $150,000 to $200,000. A restored one could bring over $1 million. I had potentially found $400,000 worth of classic cars sitting in a junkyard I bought for $45,000. Monday morning at work, I could barely focus. I spent my lunch break calling classic car appraisers, trying to find someone who could look at the vehicles and give me a professional opinion. I finally found a guy named Marcus Reynolds who ran a restoration shop in Dallas. He agreed to drive out to Amarillo on Wednesday. Tuesday evening, I got another letter from the HOA. The proposed amendment had been fast-tracked, and the vote would be next Thursday. Patricia had also included a courtesy notice that she had received complaints about my truck, which apparently had been parked slightly over the property line into the street. The fine was $50. I measured my truck's position that night with a tape measure. It was 8 inches from the curb, well within my property. I took photos from multiple angles. Wednesday afternoon, Marcus Reynolds arrived at the junkyard in a Ford F-350 with a trailer full of equipment. He was in his 50s, with grease-stained jeans and a shirt that advertised his shop. He walked with the confident stride of someone who knew his business. "Let us see what you got," he said. We spent 2 hours going over the 3 cars. Marcus took photos, checked VIN numbers, examined frames and engines. He barely spoke during the inspection, just grunted occasionally and made notes on a tablet. Finally, he stood back and looked at me. "You know what you have here?" "I think so," I said, "but I want to hear it from someone who knows." "The Charger is a real deal 440R/T. Needs a full restoration, but the numbers match, and the frame is solid. In current condition, you are looking at $45,000 to $55,000. Restored could hit $120,000, maybe $140,000 if you do it right." The Mustang Fastback is a S-code car, originally had the 390 cubic inch engine. Someone pulled it at some point, but if you source the correct engine and do a proper restoration, you are looking at $75,000 as is, $200,000 plus restored. "But this Cuda," he said, walking over to the lime green Plymouth. "This is special. You got a real Hemi Cuda here, one of about 652 made in 1970. Even in this condition, rough as it is, the right buyer would pay $180,000 to $220,000. This car restored, done properly, you are talking 7 figures, maybe more." My mouth had gone dry. So total value as they sit right now, Marcus did math on his tablet. Conservative estimate, 300,000. Could push 350 or higher with the right buyers. You hit the lottery, my friend. We talked for another hour. Marcus gave me his card and said if I wanted to sell any of the cars, he knew collectors who would pay fair market value. He also offered to do the restoration work himself if I wanted to go that route. I drove home that night feeling like I was floating. The Junkyard, the thing Patricia Wellington and the HOA had mocked and condemned, contained more wealth than I had ever dreamed of owning. Thursday at work, Jerry noticed my mood had improved dramatically. "You look like you won the lottery," he said. "Something like that," I replied. The HOA meeting that night was more crowded than the previous one. Word had spread about the proposed amendment, and apparently more than a few residents were uncomfortable with it. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a seat near the back. Patricia called the meeting to order with her usual self-important tone. "Tonight we vote on Amendment 47, which addresses resident business activities and community standards. Before we vote, does anyone wish to speak?" I stood up. "I do." Patricia's expression tightened. "Mr. Xander, please share your thoughts." I walked to the front of the room, my heart pounding but my resolve solid. This amendment is being proposed specifically to target me because I bought investment property outside this community. Property that has nothing to do with Sunset Ridge, that does not violate any existing HOA rules, and that does not impact anyone here. "It impacts property values," Patricia interjected. "Does it? How exactly does property I own miles away impact values here? Have you conducted a study? Gotten appraisals? Or are you just uncomfortable with the idea that someone in your perfect neighborhood owns something you consider beneath you?" A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Susan, my elderly neighbor, was nodding. "Furthermore," I continued, "I had an appraiser look at the property yesterday. That junkyard you all have been mocking contains 3 classic cars worth a combined $400,000. So maybe before we start judging investments, we should know what we are talking about." The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's face had gone red. "That is irrelevant to the matter at hand." "Is it? This amendment is based on the premise that my property reflects poorly on this community. But I would argue that owning valuable classic cars reflects better than passing judgment on your neighbors without cause." A man I did not recognize stood up. I move to table this amendment pending further review. Seconded, Susan said immediately. Patricia looked like she had bitten into a lemon. Very well. All in favor of tabling Amendment 47. More than 2/3 of the hands went up. The amendment was tabled. I sat back down, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Patricia glared at me for the rest of the meeting, but she did not bring up the junkyard again. Over the next 2 weeks, I focused on securing the 3 classic cars. I had a flatbed towing company move all 3 vehicles to a climate-controlled storage facility in Amarillo. The cost was not cheap, but protecting $400,000 worth of assets was worth it. Marcus connected me with a collector in Houston who specialized in Mopar muscle cars. His name was Richard Chen, and he flew up to Amarillo the following Monday to see the Hemi Cuda in person. Richard was a quiet man in his 60s, wearing an expensive watch and driving a Tesla. He walked around the Cuda 3 times without speaking, then spent an hour going over every detail with a flashlight and inspection mirror. "I will give you $210,000 cash as it sits," he finally said. I thought about it. That was serious money, enough to pay off my mortgage and have plenty left over. But something made me hesitate. "Let me think about it," I said. Richard nodded. "Take your time." "But I am serious about the offer. Not many of these left, and this one has good bones." Over the next week, I talked to collectors about the Mustang and Charger as well. The offers ranged from reasonable to insulting. The best offer on the Mustang was $82,000. The Charger had several interested buyers at $50,000. If I sold all 3 cars as they sat, I would walk away with roughly $340,000. Life-changing money. But I kept thinking about Earl Thompson, about his shaking hands and the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about the old days. I thought about the history sitting in those vehicles, about the work that went into building them, about the people who had driven them when they were new. And I thought about Patricia Wellington's face when I had told the HOA meeting what those cars were worth. I decided to keep them. Marcus recommended a business attorney named Linda Torres, who helped me set up an LLC for the junkyard property. We called it Xander Classic Restorations. If I was going to keep the cars, I was going to do it right. The plan was to restore the Charger first, since it needed the least work. Marcus gave me a detailed estimate. 6 months of work, $75,000 in parts and labor. When finished, the car would be worth $130,000 to $150,000. A solid return on investment. I arranged financing through my bank, using the appraised value of the cars as collateral. The loan officer was skeptical at first, until she saw Marcus's appraisal documentation and Richard Chen's written offer on the Cuda. "I have never financed a classic car restoration before," she admitted. "But your numbers look solid. Approved." Spring turned to summer. I spent my weekends at the junkyard, cleaning up the property, organizing parts, selling off scrap metal. The junkyard itself was starting to generate modest income, enough to cover the property taxes and insurance. The Charger's restoration began in July. I drove to Dallas every Saturday to watch Marcus and his team work. They stripped the car down to the frame, sandblasted decades of rust, replaced floor pans and quarter panels. The engine came out, got rebuilt with new internals, came back purring like it was 1969 again. In August, Patricia Wellington sent another letter. This one claimed that my frequent trips to Dallas meant I was neglecting property maintenance in Sunset Ridge. The letter cited grass that was approaching violation length and hedges that appeared unkempt. I measured my grass that evening. It was 2.5 inches tall. The HOA limit was 4 inches. The hedges had been professionally trimmed 3 weeks earlier. I was done playing nice. I called Linda Torres, my attorney. Can the HOA harass me like this? They can send letters, Linda said. But if they fine you without cause, that is actionable. Keep documentation of everything, dates, photos, measurements. If they push it, we push back. The next letter came in September. This one claimed my truck was creating a disturbance because I occasionally left early on Saturday mornings to drive to Dallas. Someone had complained about engine noise at 6:30 in the morning. I started keeping a journal of every interaction with the HOA, every letter, every phone call. I photographed my property twice a week. I measured my grass every Sunday. In October, the charger was finished. Marcus called me on a Thursday afternoon, and I could hear the pride in his voice. Come see your car. I took a personal day from work on Friday and drove to Dallas. The restoration shop was in an industrial area near Love Field Airport, a metal building with a dozen bays and the smell of paint and oil. The charger sat in the front bay, and it took my breath away. The body was finished in correct 1969 Hemi orange, the paint so deep and glossy you could see your reflection. The chrome bumpers gleamed. The black vinyl top looked factory fresh. Inside, the seats were roof-upholstered in correct black vinyl, the dashboard restored with new gauges, the steering wheel wrapped in fresh leather. Marcus opened the hood and fired up the 440 engine. It rumbled to life with a deep, visceral growl that I felt in my chest. He revved it twice, and the sound echoed through the shop like thunder. Take it for a drive, Marcus said, handing me the keys. I drove that charger through Dallas for 2 hours, feeling the power, hearing the engine sing, watching people turn their heads as I passed. It was not just a car. It was a rolling piece of history, a testament to an era when American automakers built machines that were powerful and beautiful and unapologetic. When I got back to the shop, Marcus was grinning. What do you think? I think it is perfect, I said. We took professional photos the next day. Marcus knew a photographer who specialized in classic cars, and we shot the charger at various locations around Dallas. The photos were stunning. I listed the charger for sale on several classic car websites and forums, priced at $145,000. Within 3 days, I had 8 serious inquiries. Within a week, I had 3 offers over asking price. A collector from Arizona flew in to see the car in person. His name was Daniel Morrison, a retired software engineer who had been looking for a numbers-matching 440 charger for 5 years. He spent an hour going over every detail, test drove the car for 30 minutes, then came back with his checkbook out. $150,000, and I will arrange shipping, he said. We shook hands. The money cleared 5 days later. After paying back the restoration loan and covering Marcus's fees, I netted $68,000 in profit. Not bad for 6 months of work and weekends spent learning about classic cars, but more than the money, I had proven something. To myself and to Patricia Wellington. The next HOA meeting was in early November. I attended, sitting in my usual spot near the back. Patricia ran through the agenda with her typical efficiency, avoiding eye contact with me. During the open comment period, I stood up. I just wanted to inform the board that I recently sold my first restored classic car for $150,000. That car came from the Junkyard property some of you were concerned about earlier this year. I am starting restoration on the second vehicle next month. I wanted to thank everyone who supported me and remind the community that sometimes investments that look questionable turn out to be quite valuable. I sat back down. The room was silent for a moment, then Susan started clapping. A few others joined in. Patricia's face was stone. Thank you for that update, Mr. Xander. Moving on to the next agenda item. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to congratulate me. A younger couple who lived 2 streets over asked if I would be interested in looking at a classic car they had inherited. A retired mechanic offered to help with future restorations. Patricia Wellington left without speaking to anyone. In December, work began on the Mustang Fastback. This restoration was more complex because we had to source the correct 390 engine and transmission. Marcus found one in Oregon, numbers matching to a car that had been totaled in 1973. The engine alone cost $18,000, but it was the right piece for an authentic restoration. Christmas that year was quiet. I spent it alone in my house, as I had for the past 3 years, but somehow it felt different. I had purpose now, something to work toward beyond the monotony of work and lawn maintenance and HOA meetings. New Year came, and with it, another letter from Patricia Wellington. This one was different from the others. It was not about my property or my truck or my hedges. It was a notice that the HOA would be conducting property inspections in January to ensure compliance with all covenant regulations. Any violations found during inspection will be subject to immediate fines, the letter stated. Residents will be given 48 hours to correct violations before additional penalties are assessed. Linda Torres read the letter and frowned. They are allowed to inspect common areas and exterior property, but they need to give reasonable notice. 48 hours is pushing it, and they cannot just make up violations. The inspection happened on a Saturday in mid-January. Patricia Wellington arrived with 2 board members and a clipboard that looked ominous. They spent 20 minutes walking around my property, measuring things, taking photos, making notes. The violation notice arrived on Monday. It listed 7 items: grass exceeding permitted height in northwest corner of property by ½ an inch. Fine, $100. Mailbox post showing signs of weathering. Fine, $75. Exterior paint on garage door faded in violation of community standards. Fine, $150. Driveway showing oil stain. Fine, $100. Gutter on east side of house showing minor separation. Fine, $100. Unauthorized plantings, 3 rose bushes my ex-wife had planted 5 years ago. Fine, $50. Window screens on second floor showing discoloration. Fine, $75. Total fines, $650. Due within 30 days. I stared at the notice for a long time, feeling anger build in my chest. Every single item was either fabricated or absurdly petty. My grass was not overgrown. The mailbox post was wooden and supposed to weather. The garage door paint was the original color from when the house was built. The oil stain on my driveway was the size of a quarter. The gutter was fine. The rose bushes had been there for years. The window screens were beige, which some might call discoloration, but was actually their natural color after sun exposure. This was not about violations. This was personal. I called Linda Torres. They are coming after me. She read through the violation notice over the phone. This is harassment. Textbook harassment. Here is what we are going to do. First, document everything. Photo evidence that these violations do not exist or are unreasonable. Second, we file a formal complaint with the HOA board. Third, if they do not back down, we sue. I spent the next day photographing everything. The grass, measured at 3 inches. The mailbox, which matched every other mailbox on the street. The garage door, which matched the original architectural plans I pulled from the city. The tiny oil spot, next to a quarter for scale. The gutter, perfectly intact. The rose bushes, which appeared in Google Street View images going back 6 years. The window screens, identical to those on my neighbor's house. Linda prepared a formal response letter. It was 3 pages of detailed rebuttal. with photo evidence attached, and a clear statement that the fines were without merit and appear to constitute targeted harassment. We sent it certified mail to the HOA board and to Patricia Wellington personally. The response came 10 days later, not from Patricia, but from the board's attorney. The letter was professional and cold. It stated that the violations were determined by board consensus and that the fines were within the board's authority under the covenant. It did not address any of the evidence we had provided. It ended with a statement that failure to pay the fines within 30 days would result in additional penalties and potential legal action to place a lien on my property. "They are doubling down," Linda said when I showed her the letter. "That is actually good for us. It shows a pattern of behavior. We have enough to file suit." "How much will that cost me in legal fees?" "Could be 10 to 20,000 depending on how far they take it. But if we win, which I think we will, they pay your legal fees plus damages." I thought about it over the weekend. 20,000 was not nothing, but I had made good money on the Charger, and the Mustang restoration was progressing well. More than the money, it was the principle. Patricia Wellington had been making my life difficult for a year, and it was time to push back. "File the suit," I said. The lawsuit was filed in district court in Potter County on February 15th. We sued the HOA board and Patricia Wellington personally for harassment, abuse of authority, and violation of the covenant's fair treatment clause. We asked for dismissal of all fines, payment of legal fees, and 10,000 in damages. The local news picked up the story 3 days later. It was a slow news week in Amarillo, and homeowner sues HOA over classic car dispute made for a good human interest piece. A reporter named Jennifer Hastings called me for an interview. I almost said no, but Linda thought it might help. Public opinion matters in these cases. If the community sees that the HOA is being unreasonable, it puts pressure on them to settle. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. Jennifer did a fair job presenting both sides. She showed photos of my property, clearly well maintained. She quoted the violation notice and my response. She interviewed a legal expert who said the fines appeared excessive. And she ended with a brief statement from Patricia Wellington, who said only, "The board stands by its decisions." The story went viral locally. By Friday morning, it had been shared on social media hundreds of times. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of me. Several people shared their own stories of dealing with Patricia Wellington and the Sunset Ridge HOA. That weekend, I was at the grocery store when a woman I did not know stopped me in the produce section. "You are the guy suing the HOA," she said. "Good for you. That woman is a tyrant." It happened 3 more times before I finished shopping. The HOA responded to the lawsuit with a motion to dismiss, arguing that the board had absolute authority over covenant enforcement. The motion was denied. The judge set a trial date for May. In March, the Mustang restoration was nearly complete. Marcus had outdone himself. The fastback was finished in its original dark moss green, the body laser straight, the chrome perfect. The 390 engine had been rebuilt to exact factory specifications. The interior was done in ivy gold, the correct color for a 1967 fastback, with new upholstery and restored trim. We did a test drive on a Saturday afternoon, and the car was everything I had hoped. Fast, loud, beautiful. The kind of car that made you want to drive cross-country just to feel the wind and hear the engine roar. Professional photos were taken. The car was listed at $195,000. Within a week, I had a buyer, a collector in California who owned 17 Mustangs and had been looking for a proper S-code fastback. He offered $200,000 without negotiating, The sale closed in April. After expenses and loan repayment, I netted $93,000 in profit. The Mustang sale made the news again. Jennifer Hastings did a follow-up story, this time focusing on the success of my restoration business. She interviewed Marcus, who praised the quality of the work. She interviewed Richard Chen, who was still interested in buying the Hemi Cuda. She even got a comment from Daniel Morrison in Arizona, who called his Charger the best car I have ever owned. The story mentioned the lawsuit only briefly, but the implication was clear. The HOA had mocked an investment that had proven incredibly successful. The trial began on May 12th. It was held in a small courtroom in the Potter County Courthouse in downtown Amarillo. Linda had explained that most HOA disputes never made it to trial, usually settling beforehand. But Patricia Wellington and the board had refused every settlement offer. The HOA was represented by a firm out of Dallas, a 3-person team that looked expensive. Their strategy became clear quickly. They argued that the board had broad authority under the covenant, and that all violations were legitimate based on their interpretation of community standards. Linda's strategy was simpler. Show that the violations were either fabricated or applied selectively, and establish a pattern of harassment. We called witnesses. Susan, my elderly neighbor, testified that my property was always well maintained and that she had never seen any violations. The retired mechanic who had offered to help with restorations testified that he had lived in Sunset Ridge for 15 years and had never seen the HOA enforce violations as petty as those cited in my case. We presented photo evidence of other properties in the neighborhood with similar or worse conditions that had never been cited. A mailbox 3 houses down that was more weathered than mine. Several driveways with oil stains. Multiple houses with faded paint or minor gutter issues. Linda called an HOA governance expert who testified that selective enforcement of rules was a violation of fair housing principles, and that the fines in my case appeared punitive rather than corrective. The HOA's witnesses were less convincing. Patricia Wellington testified that she had personally inspected my property and found legitimate violations. Under cross-examination, Linda asked her to explain why similar conditions on other properties had not been cited. Each case is evaluated individually, Patricia said. But you did not find violations on other properties during the same inspection period, correct? I was not inspecting those properties. Why not? If you were conducting community-wide inspections, why was Mr. Xander's property the only one cited for these violations? Patricia hesitated. We received complaints about his property. From whom? That information is confidential. Linda presented evidence that no formal complaints had been filed according to HOA records. Patricia claimed the complaints had been verbal, but she could not provide dates or details. The trial lasted 3 days. Closing arguments were made on Thursday afternoon. The judge said she would issue a ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like the longest of my life. I tried to focus on work, on planning the Hemi Cuda restoration, on anything other than the lawsuit. But it was always there in the back of my mind. The ruling came on a Friday afternoon. Linda called me at work. We won. I sat down, suddenly dizzy. What? We won everything. The judge dismissed all fines, ordered the HOA to pay your legal fees, awarded you $12,000 in damages for harassment, and issued an injunction preventing them from selective enforcement of rules. The judge specifically cited Patricia Wellington's testimony as lacking credibility and noted a clear pattern of targeted behavior. I did not remember the rest of that conversation. I just remember hanging up and sitting at my desk, staring at the wall, feeling a weight lift that I had been carrying for over a year. The news coverage was immediate. Jennifer Hastings did another story, this time with the headline "Local Man Wins David vs. Goliath Battle Against HOA." The story went beyond local. It was picked up by state news, then by national outlets looking for feel-good stories about standing up to bureaucracy. My phone rang constantly. Other people who had been fined by HOAs calling to ask for advice. Reporters wanting interviews. Classic car enthusiasts wanting to know about the cuter restoration. 3 days after the ruling, Patricia Wellington resigned as HOA president. The resignation letter was brief and gave no reason, but everyone knew why. The board accepted her resignation without comment. The following week, I attended my first HOA meeting since the trial. The atmosphere was completely different. The new interim president was a man named Thomas Reeves, a retired teacher who had been on the board for 2 years, but had always been overshadowed by Patricia. Thomas opened the meeting by acknowledging that changes were needed. The previous leadership lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to be, he said. We are here to maintain property values and community standards, not to make life difficult for our neighbors. Moving forward, we will be reviewing all policies and focusing on fair, consistent enforcement. After the meeting, several people came up to shake my hand. Susan gave me a hug. You did good, she said. You stood up when it mattered. Summer came. I started restoration on the Hemi-Cuda in June. This was the big one, the car that could potentially bring 7 figures if done right. Marcus and I planned every detail, from the correct lime green paint code to the exact specifications of the Hemi engine rebuild. The restoration would take a year, maybe longer. The cost would be significant, over $150,000 in parts and labor. But Richard Chen had agreed to pay $250,000 for the car when it was finished, with bonuses if it won awards at major classic car shows. I also hired 2 employees for the Junkyard. A father and son team, Mike and Brandon Torres, who knew their way around old cars and were happy to have steady work. Together, we turned the property into something Earl Thompson would have been proud of. We organized the parts inventory, created a website, started selling rare components to restorers around the country. Xander Classic Restorations was becoming a real business. In July, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, an elderly voice said, "Is this Isaac speaking?" "This is Earl Thompson. My grandson showed me the news stories about you and those cars. I just wanted to call and say congratulations." We talked for 30 minutes. Earl told me he was doing well in the nursing home, that his health had stabilized. He asked about the Junkyard, about the restorations, about the HOA lawsuit. He laughed when I told him about Patricia Wellington. "You know," he said, "I always knew those 3 cars were special. I kept them in the back, under that shelter, for 40 years. Never could bring myself to part them out like the others. I am glad they ended up with someone who appreciates them." "Thank you for selling me the property," I said. "You changed my life." "Sounds like you changed your own life," Earl replied. "I just gave you the opportunity." In September, the HOA held elections for a new board. Thomas Reeves was elected president officially. Several new members joined, including Susan and the retired mechanic. The new board immediately began reviewing policies, eliminating many of the more restrictive rules that Patricia had championed. At the first meeting under the new leadership, Thomas proposed a formal apology to me for the previous board's conduct. It passed unanimously. "We want Sunset Ridge to be a place where neighbors support each other," Thomas said, "not where we tear each other down." The Hemi-Cuda restoration progressed through the fall and winter. Every weekend, I drove to Dallas to watch the work. The car was stripped to bare metal, the body meticulously straightened and prepared for paint. The Hemi engine was rebuilt with correct parts, balanced and blueprinted. The transmission was sourced from a specialist in Michigan. Every detail was researched, every part authenticated. In March, almost 2 years after I had bought the Junkyard, the CUDA was finished. It was breathtaking. The lime green paint glowed under the shop lights. The black interior was flawless. The Hemi engine, with its distinctive shaker hood, rumbled with controlled violence. This was not just a car. It was a masterpiece. We entered the CUDA in several major shows. It won Best in Class at a Mopar show in Oklahoma City. It took second overall at the Muscle Car and Corvette Nationals in Illinois. Automotive magazines requested photo shoots. Classic car websites featured it in articles. Richard Chen flew in from Houston to see the finished product. He walked around the car 3 times, just as he had when it was a rusted hulk in my storage unit, but this time his expression was pure awe. "This is museum quality," he said finally. "I will give you $300,000. I thought about it. That was $50,000 more than we had agreed on. But I had put my heart into this car, and I knew what it was worth. $350, I said. Richard did not even hesitate. Deal. The sale closed in April. After all expenses, loans, and Marcus's percentage, I netted $162,000 in profit. Total profit from the 3 cars, $323,000. The Junkyard property, which everyone had mocked, which the HOA had tried to use against me, which Patricia Wellington had called an embarrassment to the community, had returned over 7 times my initial investment. In May, I paid off my mortgage. The house that had felt too big and too quiet suddenly felt like mine in a way it never had before. I also set up a college fund for Brandon Torres, the young man who had been helping at the Junkyard. He was planning to study mechanical engineering, and I wanted to help make that happen. The Junkyard continued to grow. We were getting regular customers, both locals looking for parts and national buyers finding us online. I hired 2 more employees. We started offering restoration consultation services. Marcus and I discussed partnering on future projects. In June, I attended my first HOA meeting as a board member. I had been elected in a special vote, filling a vacancy left by one of Patricia's allies who had resigned. It felt strange sitting at the front table instead of in the back row, but it felt right too. We discussed community events, pool maintenance, landscaping contracts, normal HOA business without drama or harassment or targeted enforcement. It was boring in the best possible way. After the meeting, Susan came up to me. "Your ex-wife heard about everything, about the cars, the lawsuit, all of it. My sister knows her sister. Word is she is not happy she left when she did." I shrugged. Her choice to leave, my choice to move forward. That summer, I did something I had not done in years. I took a vacation. A real vacation, not just a long weekend. I loaded some camping gear into my truck and drove across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, visiting national parks and small towns, eating at diners, sleeping under the stars. Somewhere in Arizona, parked at a rest stop watching the sunset over the desert, I thought about the past 2 years. About Earl Thompson and his shaking hands, about Patricia Wellington and her harassment, about 3 rusted cars that became my salvation, about standing up when it mattered and refusing to back down. Life had not turned out the way I expected when my wife left. It had not followed the safe, predictable path I thought I wanted. But it had become something better, something mine. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "I have been thinking, what if we expand, turn this into a real operation, full-service restoration shop here in Amarillo? Use the Junkyard as a parts source and workspace, make it official." Marcus was quiet for a moment. You serious? Dead serious. I have been wanting to open a second location. Let me run some numbers, talk to my business partner. But yeah, I think we could make that work. We spent the next month planning. Marcus flew up to Amarillo twice. We toured potential properties for a proper restoration shop. We discussed business structure, investment needs, profit sharing. By August, we had a solid plan. Xander Reynolds Classic Restorations opened in October in a 10,000 square foot facility near the airport. 6 full-time employees, including Mike and Brandon from the Junkyard. State-of-the-art equipment, paint booth, machine shop, space for a dozen vehicles in various stages of restoration. The grand opening made the news again. Jennifer Hastings did another story, this time focusing on economic growth and small business success. The mayor showed up to cut the ribbon. Classic car clubs from across Texas sent representatives. Patricia Wellington did not attend. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Oklahoma, taking a job with a property management company. She never spoke publicly about the lawsuit or the HOA situation. Just disappeared from Sunset Ridge like she had never been there. Good riddance. The restoration business thrived. We had projects booked 6 months out within the first year. A 1970 Chevelle SS from a collector in Louisiana. A 1968 Camaro Z28 from a doctor in Oklahoma. A 1969 Road Runner from a retired veteran in New Mexico who had owned the car since high school and wanted to see it perfect one more time before he passed it to his grandson. Every car had a story. Every restoration was about more than just metal and paint. It was about preserving history, honoring the people who built these machines, giving new life to old dreams. In December, almost 3 years after I bought that junkyard, I hosted a Christmas party at the shop. Employees, friends, neighbors, customers. Susan came along with half the HOA board. Marcus and his family drove up from Dallas. Earl Thompson's grandson came, bringing photos of Earl standing next to some of the cars back when the junkyard was in its prime. We grilled burgers, drank beer, told stories. Someone cranked up a radio and classic rock echoed through the shop. Kids ran between the cars, their parents calling after them to be careful. I stood back and watched it all, feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Contentment, purpose, joy. Jerry from work came up beside me, holding a beer. "You did good, man, really good. Thanks." You ever think about what would have happened if you had just driven past that junkyard? Never pulled over, I thought about it. Yeah, I think about it sometimes. I would probably still be going through the motions. Work, home, HOA meetings, repeat, safe, comfortable, empty. But you took a chance. I took a chance, I agreed. Best $45,000 I ever spent. In January, we started a project that meant more to me than any other. Earl Thompson had passed away in his sleep on New Year's Day, peacefully according to his grandson. In his will, he had left me something. The title to a 1956 Ford F-100 pickup truck that had been his daily driver for 30 years. It was not worth much money, not like the muscle cars, but it was special. "Restore it however you want," his grandson said when he brought me the title. "But maybe keep it for yourself. I think Grandpa would have liked that." We brought the old Ford into the shop on a Monday. Rust everywhere, original paint faded to almost nothing, original inline-6 engine that had not run in 5 years. Most people would have called it a parts truck. But I saw what it could be, what it should be. The restoration took 4 months. We did not change anything fundamental, just brought it back to what it had been. Original color, original style interior, rebuilt original engine. We added modern safety features, upgraded the brakes and suspension, but kept the character intact. When it was finished, it was perfect. Not show car perfect. Working truck perfect, honest, real. I drove that truck every day, to work, to the shop, to the grocery store. It became my daily reminder of where I had come from, of the chance I took, of the man who had given me that opportunity without even knowing what it would mean. In March, the HOA held its annual community picnic. Different from the ones under Patricia's leadership, this one felt genuine. No forced smiles, no judgment, just neighbors being neighborly. I brought the 1956 Ford, and it became the star attraction. Kids climbed in the bed for photos. Adults admired the restoration work. Someone started a conversation about old vehicles they remembered from childhood. Thomas Reeves came over as I was loading up to leave. "You know, I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. For forcing this community to look at itself and make changes. We were heading down a bad path and you stopped it." I shook his hand. "Just did what needed doing." "That is exactly what I mean." Spring turned to summer. The business continued to grow. We hired 2 more people. Started working on our first 7-figure restoration, a rare 1969 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1 that a collector had found in a barn in Kansas. The car was rough, but authentic, one of only 69 ever made. In June, I got a call from a producer at a cable network that specialized in automotive shows. They wanted to do a series about the shop, following restorations from start to finish, telling the stories behind the cars and the people who owned them. Marcus and I discussed it and agreed, as long as we had creative control. We were not interested in manufactured drama or fake deadlines. Just honest storytelling about cars and the people who loved them. The show premiered the following January and became a modest hit. Nothing massive, but solid ratings in the automotive enthusiast demographic. It brought more customers, more attention, more opportunities. But the best part was the stories we got to tell. The veteran and his road runner. A widow who brought in her late husband's Corvette, wanting to see it restored the way he had always planned. A young couple restoring a Mustang together as their first joint project. Every car mattered to someone. Every restoration was an act of preservation, of love, of respect for the past. In April, 5 years after I bought the Junkyard, I attended an HOA meeting where Thomas Reeves proposed naming the community park after Susan, who had passed away peacefully in her sleep the previous month. The motion passed unanimously. After the meeting, as people were leaving, a new resident approached me. Young couple just moved in, clearly nervous. "Are you Xander?" the man asked. "I am. We just wanted to say thank you. When we were looking at houses, everyone told us about what you did, standing up to the old HOA. It made us feel like this was a place where people looked out for each other. That mattered to us." His wife nodded. "We almost bought in a different neighborhood, one with strict HOA rules. But after hearing your story, we knew this was where we wanted to be." I shook their hands, welcomed them to the neighborhood, told them to call if they ever needed anything. Driving home that night in the old Ford that had belonged to Earl Thompson, I thought about legacy. About the things we leave behind, the changes we make, the stands we take. Patricia Wellington probably still thought I was the problem, that I had disrupted her perfectly ordered community with my junkyard and my stubbornness. But the community that existed now, the one built on fairness and mutual respect instead of fear and arbitrary enforcement, was stronger because of what happened. The junkyard that everyone had mocked, that symbol of poor judgment and questionable investment, had become the foundation of a thriving business that employed 15 people and preserved automotive history. And those 3 cars, those rusted hulks hiding under collapsed shelters and overgrown mesquite trees, had been worth exactly what Marcus had estimated. $400,000. Life-changing money that had changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone connected to what came after. In June, we finished the ZL1 Camaro restoration. The car debuted at the Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale, Arizona, and sold for $1.3 million. Our shop's reputation was cemented. We had waiting lists extending 2 years out. We were turning down projects not because we could not do them, but because we did not have time. Success felt good, but it felt earned. Built on hard work, integrity, and refusing to back down when someone tried to make me feel small for taking a chance. The junkyard still existed, though it was more organized now. A legitimate salvage yard and parts supplier. Mike ran it full-time with help from his son and 3 other employees. It generated steady income and provided rare parts for the restoration side of the business. Sometimes I would drive out there on a Sunday afternoon, walk through the rows of old vehicles, remember what it looked like when I first saw it. Earl Thompson's life work, dismissed as junk by most people, but containing treasures for those willing to look. I kept one corner of the property exactly as it had been. The spot where I found the 3 cars. Left it overgrown, left some rusted hulks in place. A reminder of where it all started, of the moment my life changed because I was willing to take a chance on something everyone else dismissed. On a warm evening in August, I sat in that corner in a folding chair, drinking a beer, watching the sun set over the Texas plains. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Got a lead on something interesting," he said. "Guy in Montana says his grandfather left him a barn full of old cars. Thinks there might be some good ones, but he does not know cars well enough to tell. Wants us to come take a look, maybe buy the whole collection." I smiled. "When do we leave? Thought you might be interested. I will book flights for next week." After we hung up, I sat there a while longer, watching the light fade, thinking about Earl Thompson and Patricia Wellington and 3 rusted cars worth $400,000. Life was good. Not perfect, not without challenges, but good in the ways that mattered. Built on my own terms, shaped by my own choices, standing on a foundation of stubbornness and belief that value exists in places others overlook. The HOA had mocked my junkyard purchase, had tried to use it against me, had done everything possible to make me regret taking that chance. Instead, it had set me free. I finished my beer, folded up the chair, and walked back to the old Ford. The engine fired up with a reassuring rumble, and I drove home through the growing dark, ready for whatever came next. Because I had learned the most important lesson. Sometimes the things that look like junk to everyone else are exactly what you need to build something valuable. You just have to be willing to see past the rust and believe in what could be. And when people tell you you are wrong, when they mock your choices and try to tear you down, sometimes the best response is to prove them wrong so thoroughly that they have no choice but to admit you were right all along. The junkyard taught me that. Earl Thompson taught me that. 3 classic cars worth $400,000 taught me that, and I would never forget it.